Steve Wiltfong gave us 5 things he likes about this 2024 Texas recruiting class, and we discuss all 5 on today's episode.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. And on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, in the first 2 segments, we're reacting to Steve Wiltfong, 5 things he likes about this 2024 class. And in the last segment, we talk about Arch Manning's first public NIL deal with Panini America at the University of Texas. We discuss all of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are getting so close to football season. The first game for Texas on September 2nd. And if you're watching on YouTube and you enjoy the show, as always, please like, please subscribe. I'm thankful for all your support, whether it's on YouTube or on any audio channel. Now, we're talking about the 2024 Texas class today, and there's a lot to like. You know, even though it's currently the 20th ranked class, I think last year at this time, we were definitely ahead of 20th. I can't remember if we were top 10 yet, but certainly headed into the top 10, and it ended up being a top 5 class when all was said and done. This class has moved a little bit slower. The 2024 class has been a little bit more slow motion than we saw in 2022 and 2023. And part of that is purposeful, right? Because you had to kind of rebuild the roster and the culture with the new coaching staff and regime and a new philosophy. And the 2022 and 2023 class went a long way in terms of doing that. You brought in 50 players, not even including transfers, but just 50 recruits in those classes alone. So we know that this class, you're probably going to take a smaller amount of players and maybe not load up on certain positions like you did in the first 2 classes. So that could be a good reason why it's 20th as well. You know, there also are some schools who are closer to being done with their recruiting class, and so they've brought in more players, and so naturally they're going to have a higher score because they have more players to contribute to that score, which is why we always at this point in the cycle like to look at player average. But no matter how you dice it, this is a really good class for, the University of Texas in 2024, and it still has the makings of a potential top 5 to top 10 class when, some star players or star recruits in this class like Colin Simmons, Kobe Black, and Brandon Baker make their announcement, and hopefully it's to come to the 40 acres. So like I said, there's a lot to like about this class, and Steve Wiltfong, the director of football recruiting at 24/7 Sports, had a lot to say about this class as well. So he mentioned 5 things, and over the first 2 segments on today's show, we're going to discuss what he likes about this 2024 Texas class. The first thing that he mentioned was Texas landing their top 2 running back targets, and he talked about Tashard Choice possibly being the hottest running back coach in the country right now. We've mentioned on this show a few times how Steve Sarkisian has done a really good job of putting this staff together. And you can make the argument, there may not even be an argument to be made for anybody else, that Tashard Choice is doing it the best at the running back coach position right now. Because you look at last year's draft where he was able to put Bijan Robinson, who he coached at the University of Texas, and Jahmyr Gibbs, who he coached at Georgia Tech, in the top 12 picks of the draft, when we've been told that the running back market has devalued, right? It's been a long time since we've seen 2 running backs go in the top 12 of a draft. Tashard Choice coached and developed both. And you had Roschon Johnson also go in the 4th round, who's going to get a lot of touches for the Chicago Bears this year, right? We've also seen the running back recruiting with him being able to go into the state of Florida last year and bring in the number 1 running back in the country and Cedric Baxter. And this year was no different, right? These players, these recruits want to play for Tashard Choice, and he's able at this point to go into multiple states and get the top running back either in the state or in the country. When you look at their top 2 targets this year, Jarrett Gibson, right? That was a tough battle out of Florida, a kid from Gainesville who you had to beat out Florida for, as well as some other heavyweight programs, Alabama, Georgia, Florida State as well. Excuse me for my voice. And then some teams you're going to be playing against in the SEC when you get there. And when you look at Jarrett Gibson, he has dropped a little bit in the rankings on 24/7. So it's funny to see, Steve Wiltfong hyping up all of these players that he probably had a part in dropping on the services, right? But he is the 48th player in the 24/7 Sports Composite, 83 on 24/7 alone. So however you shake it, he's a top 85 player in the country and somebody who would be a really good running back at the 40 acres. And then you go into Arizona and get Christian Clark. And Steve Wiltfong mentioned that he is not rated as highly as a lot of other running backs and players on the recruiting sites, maybe ranked a little bit too low by some of the recruiting sites. 24/7 Sports now has him as a 3-star, which is crazy to me. Him even being 283 composite, if you watched his tape, is crazy to me. I think he's a lot better than that. And I think Tashard Choice knows what he's looking at when he sees running backs coming out of high school. But he's been highly recruited by the big programs. And that's something we talked about with DeAndre Robinson. You can't look at, he's a 3-star. You can't look at, his overall grade is an 87. DeAndre Robinson has 62 offers, all from the biggest schools in the nation. That tells you what they think about him and who wants him to come play for them, right? The same thing with Christian Clark. Yeah, 24/7 Sports might have him as a 3-star. He might be closer to the 300th best player in the country in terms of his ranking right now. But when every big school in the country wants you, that tells me that you can play football. And Steve Wiltfong mentioned he can run between the tackles. He's explosive outside the tackles. He can block and he can catch. He's a complete running back. So the best thing, or Steve Wiltfong's favorite thing about the 2024 class for Texas, is that Tashard Choice is a superstar at the running back coach position. And once again, he was able to land his top 2 targets. This will be amongst the nation's best running back class in terms of Jared Gibson and Christian Clark. And they'll be 2 very productive players at the 40 acres for the University of Texas. Another unheralded player thus far in the class that Steve Wiltfong really likes is Jordan Washington. And he is listed as a 3-star on 24/7 Sports and the number 559th overall player in terms of the composite ranking, right? And something I've talked about on the podcast is it feels like, for the most part, we have recruited really well at the University of Texas. But if you just look at the stars and how the recruiting services rank these players, it would seem as though the interior defensive line and the tight end position have not been recruited really well thus far at the University of Texas. And I've always said that you have to trust the eval, right? You have to trust what our staff sees over what the recruiting services see, because we've seen plenty of examples. The latest one that I'd always throw on here is Jalen Ford, right? Going from 3-star to All-American. So these players being rated low means really nothing in terms of what they can produce at the University of Texas. Like I said, it's more important to look at, the offers. And Jordan Washington had a ton of offers, namely from Texas A&M and Alabama, who he was heavily considering before deciding on the University of Texas. But what I've always thought was kind of weird was Steve Sarkisian has said that tight end is the second most important position in his offense. So I thought that even though, I trust the eval and I think these will be really good players, if we have one of the most explosive offenses in the country and we put such a heavy emphasis on the tight end position while having JT Sanders on campus, I would think we would be a little bit more competitive for the top tight ends in the country, in the top 100, top 200, whatever. But nonetheless, I like Jordan Washington. Steve Wiltfong likes Jordan Washington. Under the radar, but really good recruiting win. Like I said, you beat out A&M and Bama for his services. Steve Wiltfong said he is 6'4", 225 pounds, and has all the tools to be a mismatch and exciting player in Steve Sarkisian's offense. He may not be fully polished or fully developed yet, but he's definitely that type of move tight end that you can put at different positions, and he can make plays in the deep areas of the field, but also be that security blanket for young or experienced quarterbacks in the short to intermediate area of the field as well. He has that receiver type athleticism like JT Sanders, and he's somebody that can do a little bit of everything on the football field and doesn't shy away from blocking as well. When I watched this highlight tape, I saw a lot of that, a nastiness and a willingness, to get dirty and make plays in the running game. So, when you look at, Spencer Shannon and Will Randall, they don't necessarily move the needle for me. Jordan Washington has the athleticism, I think, to be one of the best tight ends in the country. And Steve Wiltfong thinks so, regardless of the rating as well. So those are the first 2 things he likes about the 2024 class. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we'll get into the third thing where he talks about the offensive line that Kyle Flood has put together thus far. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free, right? LinkedIn Jobs helps you find all of the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job once again for free. Terms and conditions apply. So back to what Steve Wiltfong has talked about that he likes with this 2024 recruiting class. And we know that, coming into the 2021 season when Steve Sarkisian and his staff took over, we've now heard the story a million times, right? The famous story where in his interview, he asked why Texas had more scholarship wide receivers than scholarship offensive linemen. We knew not only because of the impending move to the SEC, but just to compete at a higher level than Texas had competed at really for the last decade, we needed to get bigger and stronger in the trenches, right? We needed to make that a part of our makeup, right? To be big and strong and physical in the trenches. And so we've really heavily invested in the offensive line, where you brought in 7 in 2022, and I think you brought in 5 in the 2023 class. So that's 12 offensive linemen just in those two classes, right? And so even though you're not going to bring in a ton of offensive linemen in this class because there's a ton of great players already on campus and you're going to have a lot of competition, inevitably somebody's going to hit the transfer portal. You've kind of filled out that, room right now for the next couple of years. They've still been able to bring in 2 really good interior offensive linemen this year. And Steve Wiltfong says that 2 years in a row, Texas has signed offensive line classes that will allow them to play the caliber of football they want to play for years to come. We don't want to just go to the SEC to have it on our jerseys. We want to be able to go to the SEC and compete at the highest level in that conference. And to do that, you have to bring in really talented, big offensive linemen that can move people in the trenches. And that's what we've done in the last 3 cycles, including the 2024 class. And Steve Wiltfong said he really liked the recruiting win of Daniel Cruz, right? Beating out schools like Oklahoma, Ohio State, and Texas A&M is a really big deal. And he said there is a standard of recruiting right now in that position room, and Daniel Cruz and Nate Kibble meet that standard. And I think that that's really true because we've seen players not only out of the state of Texas, but other players in the country that are some of the most talented players on the offensive line that didn't even get an offer from Texas. It's not because Texas probably didn't think they could get him, because he didn't match, Kyle Flood's size profile. Either they were too short, maybe 6'1", 6'2", or, they were down at, 265, 270 pounds, even though they were rated highly, right? Kyle Flood definitely has a type. He wants you to be 6'3" or higher, if he can control that, and he also wants you to be 300 pounds or heavier, or on the path to doing that. So he definitely has a type. And like Steve Wiltfong said, there's a standard of recruiting in that position room right now. And Kyle Flood has done everything in his power to stick to that the last 3 years. And that's why I think we have one of the most talented rooms in the country in terms of the offensive line. And you look at this class so far, you have Daniel Cruz, 6'4", 295 pounds. He'll be 300 pounds by the time he suits up at the University of Texas. 237 composite in the country. And then Nate Kibble, who you stole from Texas A&M, 6'3", 315 pounds, number 458 composite out of Atascocita High School. I'm probably still saying that wrong. Who has produced Sam Cosme, Kenyon Green, and some other really good players on that offensive line, NFL players. So I love what Kyle Flood has done with this class. I love what he's done with the last 3 classes in terms of the offensive line, and Steve Wiltfong does as well. The number 4 thing he mentioned is Aaron Hampton specifically. Now, Aaron Hampton is the number 156 player overall in the 24/7 Sports composite. We know that Aaron Hampton was committed to Texas in 2022, decommitted in early 2023, came down to Alabama or Texas, and then he recommitted to the University of Texas and mentioned being able to play in Steve Sarkisian's offense. But the intrigue of Aaron Hampton is that he is a two-way player. And Steve Wiltfong mentioned that he is among the state's best two-way prospects, somebody that can play receiver or in the secondary, depending on where the University of Texas puts him. And he said that, he is just a natural football player, right? Somebody that is probably quicker than fast, but has a lot of, change of direction skills and can make people miss. And he mentioned again, he's just a tough, physical, hard-nosed football player. Kind of reminds me of a Savion Red, obviously a different body type, different positions for the most part. But what he's saying is somebody that you just put on the football field and they're going to go out there and play with toughness, grit, leave it all out on the field and make a lot of plays, right? And that's what Aaron Hampton, whether you put him on defense or on offense, he's going to be a dog at the University of Texas. Excited to see him either way. And to beat out Alabama for a tough, really good football player, a top 150 essentially football player in the country is huge, right? We saw last year with Jalen Hill, one of the best receivers in the state of Texas. He went to Alabama. That's a huge loss. We just saw over the last week the number one linebacker in the country out of the state of Texas goes to Georgia. One of the top corners in the country in Corian Gibson out of the state of Texas goes all the way to Clemson, right? For Texas to be back on top, if Texas wants to win at the highest level in college football, you got to get those dogs out of the state of Texas. And we did a really good job with that in the 2023 class, but that has to continue year in and year out. You cannot let the best players in the state go out of state or go to Texas A&M, TCU, Baylor, whatever, if Texas wants to compete for conference and national championships in the SEC. So to do that, you have to keep the top players in state in a recruiting hotbed like Texas at the University of Texas, and they did that with Aaron Hampton. Like I said, wherever they put him, he's going to be a superstar. Can't wait to watch him at the 40. And the last thing, the fifth thing that Steve Wiltfong mentioned is the possibility of how this class could end up. Right now it's 20th, but we talked about some of the top players in the class have yet to announce their decisions. And he said that, in back-to-back years, this has been a top 5 class. And even though right now it doesn't look like it, and maybe some momentum has slowed after, a really good June and beginning of July, this very well could be another top 5 class for Steve Sarkisian and company. Because when we talk about some of the top players, in this class that are considering Texas that have not announced yet, you have Ryan Wingo, 5-star receiver out of St. Louis, Missouri. He was considering Tennessee as well, but Tennessee just picked up a big-time receiver. That seems to be a Texas or Missouri battle right now. I have heard, a lot of smoke about Missouri lately, since he put in the crystal ball for Texas, he being Steve Wiltfong. But I think Texas still probably leads and should feel really good about that recruitment. Kobe Black, I think he's Texas all the way. He has not announced. I don't know when he's announced, and they've said maybe September or October, but I feel pretty confident that Kobe Black could end up at the University of Texas, and that would greatly jump this recruiting class as a 5-star corner, one of the 50 best players in the country. Brandon Baker, the number 1 offensive tackle in the country, would be a huge get out of California, out of Mater Dei, where Bryce Young went. And I think that one of the biggest things of bringing in Spencer Shannon last year, a tight end, even though he was a 3-star, and has some potential, out of that class, he's really big, is you establish a Mater Dei connection, right? You can always be able to say we've brought players from Mater Dei to the University of Texas, and Brandon Baker would be a hell of a get right now. That looks like a Texas or Oregon battle, but could be the potential heir apparent. Oh my Lord. That's why I shouldn't do this early in the morning, right? It could be the potential heir apparent to Kelvin Banks at the left tackle position. So that would be a huge get for Kyle Flood. Colin Simmons, we know we've all talked about the best player in the state of Texas, would definitely be the crown jewel of this class, similar to Arch Manning last year, a 5-star edge. Right now it's a Texas or LSU battle. I think we've heard more on the good side of Texas, but you can never count out LSU, especially for a really good defensive player like Colin Simmons. And then you have some other players that he mentioned that are all top 200 players that Texas is at least in the door with and should feel somewhat good about. May not lead for them, but should feel good about where they stand in the recruitment. Dominique McKinley, Nigel Smith, Wardell Mack, Zena Omiyazulu, and then Blake Ivy. So those are all top 200 players that are at least considering the University of Texas heavily at this time. So I've said I really like this 2024 class, and I really like where it'll end up. I think it'll be top 5 or top 10 in terms of the overall player grade, but it also will be top 5 or top 10 in terms of player average. So not only are you bringing in a lot of players to build up, that class, but you're bringing in some of the best players in the country, which is pivotal in terms of winning in the SEC. And I'm glad that Steve Wiltfong, the hottest name in recruiting right now, also likes this 2024 class and where it could end up. A quick word from our sponsors, and we're going to talk about Arch Manning signing his first NIL deal at the University of Texas. Slow news day, or is it just Arch Manning? We talk about that next. So one of the biggest recruiting wins in the last decade, maybe the biggest recruiting win at the University of Texas in a long time, was getting Arch Manning out of high school. And if not for just the talent, anytime you can bring in the number 1 overall player in the country and number 1 overall player in the recruiting class, that's something that you do. You sign up for and don't look back, especially at the quarterback position at the University of Texas, the most important position in football. But we can't discount the name and the prestige, right? He is a Manning, right? That is why you wanted him on campus. That is why we saw so much momentum after he signed last year, after he committed. He couldn't sign at the time, to the 2023 class. because he's a Manning, right? That name is royalty in the football world. And every school in the country would have wanted Arch Manning at their university, and the University of Texas got him, and he could potentially be the starting quarterback next year for the Texas Longhorns if he's able to beat out Malik Murphy in camp, assuming that Quinn Ewers moves on to the NFL after this season. And what's funny is that we heard quotes that, Arch Manning didn't receive any NIL money up front when he signed with the University of Texas. We also saw a quote from the family that said that, Arch Manning wouldn't accept any NIL deals until he was the starting quarterback at the University of Texas. So when it was announced that he signed this deal yesterday with Panini America, the sports trading card group, there were a lot of non-Texas fans and people that just need to, get a breath of fresh air, go touch some grass on the internet, right? Trying to clown Arch Manning or trying to get on him and say him and his family are hypocrites. And one, I think we forget that people are allowed to change their mind, right? If I say something on July 19th and then I say something completely different on July 26th, am I a hypocrite or did I change my mind? Like, that's a human emotion. That is something that we are allowed to do in America, right? There's some things we're not allowed to do. It might not be a completely free country, but we are allowed to change our minds. So people pulling up old tweets from 3-4 months ago on a quote his family made has no bearing on what he has announced or did on July 26th. Secondly, why are people clowning Arch Manning for signing an NIL deal when he is literally raising money for charity? Now, I know that only one card, which I'll explain in a little bit, is going to charity. But even then, right, I looked at the bid right now for his one-of-one card that the bidding ends for on Saturday night. It's at $60,250. By the time y'all look at it, by the time y'all hear it, it'll be higher than that. It's like 6 a.m. right now, right? So why are we clowning Arch Manning or even calling him out for being a hypocrite when his first ever NIL venture is going to raise over $100,000 probably for hospitals in Austin, for the St. David's Foundation and the St. David Hospital System? Like, what is even the point of getting on Twitter and saying, well, Arch Manning and his family said he wasn't going to take an NIL deal until he was the starting quarterback at the University of Texas, when he's raising $100,000 for people in need? People are crazy. But anyway, Quinn Ewers also signed a deal with Panini America in July. I just had to get on my soapbox because I see so much crazy stuff on Twitter, and it probably rots my brain, and I bring it to the show. So sorry to bring that to y'all too. The partnership with Panini America with Arch Manning, his first publicized NIL deal, will include autographed trading cards, features in Panini's collegiate and NIL products this fall, and select marketing campaigns. I mentioned his first card, which is a one-of-one, directly signed by Arch Manning, a Black Prism card. It will be on auction until Saturday at 8 p.m. Central. It opened up at 10 a.m. on July 25th. All proceeds going to St. David's Healthcare and St. David's Foundation. And at the time I wrote my notes down, I looked at it. It is at $60,250. I think by the time we get to Saturday night, it'll be at $100,000, which is actually insane for somebody who has never taken a snap in college football, somebody who is currently third string on the depth chart, right? You needed an argument for NIL and the good people could do with NIL. Let it go no further than this, right? Somebody who has not taken a snap yet is worth over $100,000. And we're talking about college football players were good because they had scholarships. How crazy does that sound? And not only does the winner of the bidding get this one-of-one, signed trading card from Arch Manning, he'll also have a meet and greet with Arch and then be able to help present the check to St. David's Healthcare and St. David's Foundation. So I love this move. I love that, Arch Manning is participating in NIL and getting paid for his name, image, and likeness, however that's going to work out. But I also love that his first venture in NIL is raising this much money for charity. Like I said, it's at $60,250 right now. Would not surprise me at all if it's at $100,000 by Saturday night for somebody who has not taken a snap yet at the University of Texas. Love this from Arch Manning. Love to see our players getting paid for their name, image, and likeness, but also love to see them using it to help out the community and those in need. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hook 'em and pigs.